we're not in that era anymore. I mean, we all have businesses, and we all, wanting to be, I guess, more visible so that we can speak to more people. And I guess the only way people can have that connection with you and you can build a rapport is if you make yourself available in a space where people are already, hanging out. And I think that is the biggest mind shift. I think people look at social media as being just a gimmick. It's anything but. I think it's a fantastic way to build a relationship with people, for people to actually get to understand, what value you bring to the table.
Hello, and welcome to episode 101 of the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I'm your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we'll air each episode on a Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform. Leave a review. That would mean a lot to me. Tell a friend about the podcast. Help get the word out there that introversion is a beautiful thing. Radhika Lucas is the founder of Content Halo, a space where course creators, consultants, and introverts can find their safe space and go from feeling judged, scared, and insecure to building their video confidence, even if they are shy or introverted or just getting started. Radhika has 2 decades of marketing and communications experience, ranging from paid media audits to working in media and creative agencies. Radhika is a behavior change marketer with experience in the healthcare setting. She carries these principles of supportive and safe messaging within the context of bringing about change in ourselves when transitioning through big changes like personal branding on social media or starting a business. Radhika also works in higher education, where she helps raise the profile of researchers and academics with promoting new courses. All right, I'm very excited for my guest today, Radhika. Radhika, welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast.
Hey, thanks, David. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we're going to get into the great work you do, especially helping introverts with social media, and also you're working on camera confidence, that kind of thing. But before we do that, let's just dive into your story a little bit. Tell us about your journey through understanding your introversion and then now helping other introverts.
Yeah, thanks, David. So look, I mean, my journey started, being pushed into, I guess, speech and drama as a child, and that too as an introverted child. I was absolutely terrified, and I still get flashbacks from that time. And I guess, my parents were trying to push me out there and make me bolder. But I guess. And I suppose it did help me in the end, but I still recall that time in my life with a little bit of, even now with a little bit of fear and trepidation, because I would think that if I'd gone through the whole process of the speech and drama part, that I would be a really confident public speaker by now, but that doesn't hold true even to this day. And but what I can say is that it did teach me how to, I guess, still be confronted by extroverts all around me, and I guess, in a business world and in the world that we live in today, which is, I feel, more geared towards extroverts. I guess that did teach me some coping mechanisms on how I could, I guess, survive and thrive in the world that was full of extroverts by finding ways around how to project myself and how to, I guess, make myself stand out in an otherwise really, really busy world. And when all I really wanted to do was retreat and just be on my own behind a book. So that was how my journey started much earlier on, and I guess, through life, and certainly as I've gone along through my through my career path, and now more recently in my business, what I found is being surrounded by people who are in leadership positions and also needing to be extroverts, I've found that um, there is a real, I guess, an expectation as a leader to be an extrovert as well. And then this is when I realized that I'm drawing on my experiences as a child. And I remember the child who did speech and drama all those years ago and who was terrified and is now having to take the same role of being being an introvert in an extroverted world as a leader, whether it's a leader, leading a team or a leader in your business. You're still having to come up with these coping mechanisms, which really led me to, starting my own business, which is a small business called Content Halo. It really is about creating this safe space for people who are wanting to, foray into the online marketing world, but might just not know, about, I suppose that they're in their head and really worried about being judged or feeling insecure, and just sometimes just not knowing where to start. And that is exactly where I was about 2 years ago. I struggled with all of that despite having all the training from much earlier on. And so I decided, well, actually, through my journey, I was going to create a space for people where they could feel the safe space, where they could come in and, be among other people who also wanted to walk in that journey, but didn't necessarily need to have that pressure of being surrounded in a world that expected them to be an extrovert. So that's kind of how I started Content Halo, and what I didn't realize was along the way, and I mean I've certainly been introduced to the internet marketing world and the online social media space, is that I suppose if I was to take myself back 20 years ago when I finished when I finished my university degree, I did a bachelor's in advertising, and now I'm finding 20 years later that actually those very skills are starting to help me out, and I never thought that I would actually draw on those, and currently helping course creators and consultants with the same skills that I learned back in my university days. And obviously things have changed in the last 20 years, but the same principles hold true. And that is, really about communicating your brand story and storytelling in a way for us as business owners who are wanting to project our brand out there and who are wanting to tell our story. It can be really hard. It can be a hard road of putting yourself out there, because you are, again, having to be a leader in your business, having to show up as a brand. But in an online world, especially, where you do have to be the face of your brand at some point or the other, it's really about condensing that messaging down in a way, but in a safe space that enables people to feel confident and build their confidence over time. So that's a little bit about me.
That is a great story. Thank you. How did you come to learn the word introversion and what it meant, and just really embrace it for yourself?
You know what? It's funny because I don't actually think that I heard the word introvert until I was probably in my teens. But I just remember the feeling. I remember how I felt, when, especially things like, and I guess the penny drop moment for me was, as an 11-year-old or as a 10-year-old, I was asked to walk up to a shop counter at Halloween and basically say trick or treat, and I really didn't want to. I was terrified, and I was being pushed into saying those words, and really all I wanted to do was hide, and I can still remember it. And I think it was at that point that I realized that there were other children who were quite happy just to go up to a shop counter or a place and say trick or treat, but I really didn't want to do that because I was too I guess I was feeling a bit too shy. And that was one of the penny drop moments for me. I guess I was old enough to understand that, that was one of those moments where I felt like I was being pushed into something that I really didn't want to be doing. And I felt, I guess, the same feelings as I've gone along, even with whether it be my speech and drama or whether it be going up to a group of children and introducing myself. I really didn't want to be doing that. And quite often I was labeled a snob or reserved by my own family, without actually realizing that, I wasn't either. I just really needed my own time and to come to terms with the fact that I just needed extra time to be able to go out there and be there in the public, and just rather than going all out and saying, here I am.
So how did you embrace that? How did you decide, you know what, this is who I am. There's strengths here. There's some things that I need. How did you decide that that was okay?
For a long time, actually, I just faked it, um, which kind of sounds which sounds weird, really, because there are many people who just wouldn't even come out. But I think I grew up in an environment where I really just had, I had to do a lot of things because I was pushed into doing them, and so I developed these coping mechanisms, I guess, where I just ended up becoming a really high functioning introvert, if there is such a word, where outwardly I would come across as an extrovert when, the whole time um, I I really didn't want to be fronting up. And even now, as I'm speaking to you, I'm constantly battling that, which is funny because I've spoken to you before, but it happens it happens every single time, which is so odd. And so, yeah, I guess to answer your question, the whole workaround has been developing frameworks and developing systems for myself where I prepare myself just as I would do before a stage show, because obviously, as you know, I was in drama, and I guess in my own quiet way, what I didn't realize is that I was building up these frameworks that would eventually help serve me in the business that I've created for myself. And that journey, I just haven't realized just how powerful that journey has been, and I'm so thankful for it every single day. So, very, very excited to be able to share that with others who might be feeling the same.
Yeah, that's great. And that's what it is. We have great strengths, but we need to understand how we might need to prepare for things or relax sometimes and give ourselves some space to think and recharge and all that. But those kinds of insights can be life-changing, and you can be yourself, because as you were saying, when you're trying to be something else, it can be very draining and also not effective, because I've been there. I've done that, and I have embraced who I am, and it's so much better.
Yes, no, I think coming to that realization, I think especially, I think probably even more so, being a leader when you're leading teams, I think it's more important to be an authentic leader, because that's what people are looking for these days, is making sure that your true north is always grounded, and that you can show up as yourself. And well, if that means sometimes showing a bit of vulnerability, then so be it. And sometimes it's okay not to be, absolutely everything and absolutely extrovert all the time, or pretending to be an extrovert all the time anyway, and
Yeah,
hide behind that facade. Yeah.
yeah, there's some definite myths around leadership. People do want your authenticity. You
Yeah.
do need to be vulnerable, but you also have some great strengths that you can bring to your leadership. Maybe one introvert is a strategic thinker, or maybe one introvert is really good at developing relationships. There's so many gifts that you can bring to the leadership. You bring yourself, and that's what people are really looking for.
Yeah, 100%. And I hope that I can, demonstrate that in my own leadership, with the people who I work with. So, yeah.
Okay. So in this journey, have you come to embrace that you have some strengths as an introvert? What's a strength or two that you have?
I think I would say that, oh gee, I actually need to think about this one. Let me
Okay.
just,
And that's normal for us. Having time to think is sometimes what we need. And what you just did, that's what we need
yeah,
to do. Hey, and that's been a key in conversations, because we do need to think. And sometimes we just like you just did with me, we need to tell people, hey, give me a
yeah,
second or a minute, or I'll call you tomorrow. You can't tell me that though.
no, no, absolutely not. What are my strengths? I guess I have really high emotional intelligence as a result of my introversion. I feel as though I can relate to other people really well, because I actually think, and I don't know what the stats are, but I actually get the feeling that there are more people in this world who are introverts than extroverts. You may actually know that better than I do.
It's about 50-50.
50. Yeah, well, there you go. That's half the world. That's a lot of
Yeah.
people. Yeah.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I guess, one of the biggest strengths is really empathy. And I think if you're building a business that is helping other business owners who are walking the same path, I think it's really important to have that emotional intelligence or empathy for people who might actually be walking, in the same path, might actually have those struggles, and not realize which way they need to turn or how they can make that transition. I think that can feel like a really, really, really scary place. And I think drawing on my strength of, I guess my time in, I guess, in the trenches of doing what I've done, which is developing those systems and frameworks to help myself. There is a pathway, and it's not necessarily a fast pathway, but there is a pathway out. And I think so long as people are ready to put in the work, I think there is definitely value to be had in developing yourself into that journey towards, embracing yourself and your introversion, and showing up regardless, rather than hiding.
All right, very good. And we definitely talk about strengths on the show. We talk about needs. Maybe you need some time to think, like you said just now. Maybe you need some time to prepare. We do some myth busting. You've actually brought up one. Sometimes people do think that introverts are snobs, and normally that's probably not true. It's just we might be in our heads, and we might not notice something. And it's definitely not that we're arrogant or snobs. And so often that can be a misconception. I know I've been
Yes.
accused of that before, and it's like, no, nothing's further from the truth there.
Yeah, well, interesting, because I'd never heard anyone else having that experience. I was, up until now, as you mentioned it, I didn't even realize that there might be others who have thought, or they have been labeled as a snob, and actually that's interesting. The whole thing of labels, where you can get quite stuck in your label, right? And because that's what you've identified with. So you bring up a really good point there.
Yeah, and that's a big part of the show. We bust myths. Is there any other introvert myths you want to bust?
I think the big one is really actually, I was going to talk more about the labels. Now, how do I go about this, David?
Okay. What
Um,
label?
the label of being called a snob, or
Okay.
anything really. I think people come up with labels for themselves, whatever that might be. It doesn't necessarily have to be a snob, or it doesn't have to be, people can just say to themselves, "Oh, I'm not such and such," and they've actually developed an identity for themselves even without realizing it. And then, how do you get around that identity, and how do you then develop new habits around that identity, or busting past that identity? And I think if one can acknowledge that, what labels have you given yourself, and how is that getting in the way of you showing up in your business, or as a leader, or really just anything that you want to be able to achieve. um, how do you get past that label for yourself? And I think the first part to that is actually acknowledging, and then once you acknowledge it and you're aware of it, then you know that you can work around it. And I think the other thing, I guess the other myth is to probably mention that it's not a condition that needs to be cured. So this is not a transition from being an introvert to an extrovert. And I think that's the other myth that I probably want to talk about is, the world of social media does demand of us to show up in a way that we just wouldn't as introverts. I mean, I know that every part of me, even now, every single time I'm live or I'm doing a video, actually cringes. Um, when I look at myself. um, but it's actually coming to the realization that there is really nothing that I need to fix, and that I can still be me, and I can still be an introvert. but as long as as long as I lean on my frameworks, that I can actually work with it and work around it, rather than trying to cure it, which is what I used to be, I used to want to do, rather than the place where I'm at now. So that's probably the other myth as well, is just accepting who you are rather than wanting to fix it.
Yeah, well said. It's not something to be fixed. In fact, that's something I say at just about the beginning of every podcast. And, there are things that we can overcome. Like, I truly believe if somebody's shy, and introverts or extroverts can be shy, it's not limited to introverts. But if you understand yourself and your introversion, that could be a lot of the battle in overcoming shyness, treating anxiety. Those things can be overcome or treated. But introversion is just a beautiful part of our personalities that we need to understand and embrace and accept. Labels aren't meant to box us in. Discovering that you're introvert isn't meant to say that you can't do this or you can't do that. But, we're fellow introverts. We can learn a lot from each other. As we get to know each other better, I bet that we're not exactly the same. We probably have a lot of differences, but we can learn from what's common. But at the same time, it really sets us free to know who we are and really excel when we know who we are and not be boxed in by a label.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
often people are like, "Oh, David, I don't know. I might be an introvert, I might be extrovert, or somewhere in the middle." I'm like, okay, well, let's not worry about the word introvert, extrovert, or middle. Let's talk about, okay, who are you? What are your strengths? What are your needs? Let's talk about that, and maybe not even use those words and see where we can go with that.
Yeah, exactly. I think freeing yourself of that can be really liberating, because um, and I think, even a conversation about introversion can, I mean, obviously people who are listening will be identifying as introverts, but I think just also acknowledging that there can be periods in your life, or even really weeks in your life, where you can transition from being, your base could be introvert, but actually that you're not confined to a state of being or a stillness, that's defined by what label you've given yourself. And I think that's really important to acknowledge as well, is that you can have those peaks and troughs as you come in. And I think just being aware of it is enough. But I think aware of it in a way that doesn't stop you from then taking those steps towards whatever it is that you want to achieve, whether it is you want to achieve more visibility in your brand and your business, or whether you want to, achieve perhaps speaking in public, for example, as an introvert. I think it's really just acknowledging that that baseline doesn't have to be still, and that baseline can change and the benchmarks can move as time goes by.
Yeah, and I also would say that as you get to know yourself, it's not that we can't do things; it's the how is going to be different. So I love doing this. I love podcasting. I love public speaking. But if I compare myself to an extroverted colleague, we're going to prepare for it much differently. Like, I provided you some questions, you gave me some feedback. So we prepared, right? With an extrovert, they may not need those questions in advance. So
No.
you learn what works for you and you can do whatever you want, but the how is going to look different. And that's what we're going to get into a little bit with your work and marketing and social media. So,
Yeah.
and that's the other big piece of this show is strengths, needs, myth busting, and also some strategies for success. So
Yeah.
you have a course coming up and it's called Cringe to Confident.
I
Tell us
do.
about that. How'd you come up with that name? What does that mean?
Oh, look, that name has a special meaning, and it's very close to my heart. It actually started a couple of years ago. So I had just started Content Halo, and I knew what kind of direction I wanted to go in. But I also knew that I was struggling with really getting confident on camera. I was absolutely terrified. I was scared of, being judged. I was insecure. I didn't feel as though my messaging was landing. I hated actually looking at myself and my voice, and so many other things. And I was scared of what people would think of me. But again, my younger self, who had done speech and drama, came back out. And I decided that I was simply going to practice, and that I was going to practice on my, just by myself. But the issue was that it took me nearly 18 months. So it was a really long, slow process of me just getting in front of the camera, speaking to myself, over and over again. I think I've lost count of how many videos I actually didn't release. And really, that was a way for me to prime my mind into believing that I could transition and make that transition for myself. But in doing that, I guess my boys, who are now teenagers, they were witnessing this whole transformation over over 18 months. And I remember one time when I recorded something, and then I showed one of my kids, my videos, and with expecting to be patted on the back, and instead I got that is so cringe. And there you
that's
go.
What they said.
That's what they said.
Yeah, that's great.
And let's just say it was it brought all my fears to the surface, because that's exactly what I was thinking others were going to think of me. Is that, oh my gosh, I'm so cringe. And then I decided, well, you know what? I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to embrace my cringe, and I'm going to embrace my cringe with a view towards building confidence, and, showing up anyway. Because I guess I'd walked the path of 18 months. I'd walked the path of, leaning on the times when I had done my speech and drama. I brought all those skills, I guess, to the one, I guess it all came to a head. And it was really just about me putting those frameworks in place, which, of course, I wanted to make available for, everybody else, and in the hope that it will help someone else fast track their process towards building confidence without having to necessarily wait 18 months like I did. And so so I have come up with a really handy guide that people can use, and to fast track their progress. Look, they can get it at confident.contenthalo.com. And it really is a really quick, nifty guide. You build your confidence in 5 days, just on your own. So there's no social media involved. And you can just go on and follow the guidelines, and do it in literally 5 minutes a day for 5 days. And then you compare your first take to your fifth take, and then see how it goes. And, the details are in the guide. But so look, that was my journey towards towards cringe to confident. And I think, that particular course name is going to be really, really close to my heart because of that reason. It was a momentous time. It was a momentous occasion.
Yeah. So what you just were describing, that's actually a free offer you have on your website, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah. So it's just a free guide. That people can go in and download, and work with it in their own time, really. Because there's nothing worse than putting yourself out there straight away, especially if you're not quite ready to. And as introverts, we realize that we recognize that. So there it is. It's an introverted-friendly guide.
So I have a couple questions. Why is it important that we are on camera, and what's holding us back, especially as introverts?
I think, look, where we are at now in this day and age, and especially with online businesses, and especially for people wanting to build courses, and consultants who are wanting to get more visibility, I think it's really, really important that people actually get to know who you are as a person. And I think, if I always put it akin to, let's say, I was wondering, let's just say I had a shop, a corner shop, and I had a whole bunch of foot traffic because I was in a corner shop and I was in a busy straight corner. I was getting to see people all the time. Well, if you take that same shop and then you put it in a quiet suburban street, well, there isn't going to be very many people walking past your shop. And so this poor shop owner now has to go to the main street and stand there with a billboard or something, or wearing a chicken suit to attract attention, right? But we're not in that era anymore. I mean, we all have businesses, and we all, wanting to be, I guess, more visible so that we can speak to more people. And I guess the only way people can have that connection with you and you can build a rapport is if you make yourself available in a space where people are already, hanging out. And I think that is the biggest mind shift. I think people look at social media as being just a gimmick. It's anything but. I think it's a fantastic way to build a relationship with people, for people to actually get to understand, what value you bring to the table. I think it's a really great way, of really just being able to help others as well, because there are so many skills that we as individuals have, and we're never going to be able to have enough one-on-one conversations. I mean, we're never going to have enough time in the day to actually have these conversations like I'm having with you right now, in a one-to-one format. And so it really is about enabling not only others to seek from you, but also enabling yourself to then be able to, have visibility for yourself as well as your business in a social media setting. And I think as introverts, this can be challenging because you are suddenly opening yourself up to all of those, all of those feelings, all of those, I guess, self-labels, all of the things that we've talked about so far, and then have that as a barrier and get in the way. And I think, it really is, I guess, my mission to try and bring as many introverted course creators, consultants on board, to help them in their journey, because it can be a pretty lonely road doing it alone for 18 months. And that's not to mention the fact that I've actually had plenty of practice in the lead up to the last 18 months, purely on account of my own life's journey. So, I think that's kind of where social media comes in. That's where it's, immensely helpful. And I think is why more people need to embrace it, really, and walk towards their path of, getting more visible.
Yeah, absolutely. So you also help introverted consultants and course creators take their businesses online. How do you do that?
Yeah, so and I'll give you an example of one of my clients who I work with, and Steve's a farmer, has been a fourth generation farmer, and large production grain farm, and look, he's worked all his life building up this farm. Obviously, it's an intergenerational farm, and look, he just came to a point in his life where he said, well, I've got all of this knowledge, I've got all of these skills. How do I share them with others? And how do I do that in a way that, many people can benefit from it? And I said, well, actually, let's unpack this a bit. I mean, and Steve's a farmer, he's not a marketer, but he has a wealth of knowledge. You only have to get talking to him to actually realize just how knowledgeable he actually is, and the lessons that he can impart, especially in a time and era where we are moving into of self-sustainability and I guess organic vegetable gardening and a healthier lifestyle, and people wanting to really grow their produce just because of the fun of it and seeing things grow, but also because it's almost become a necessity. I mean, apparently by 2030, 90% of the topsoil in the United States might be depleted. So, it's a really good way of actually learning from soil experts like Steve, about his journey, and the way in which I helped Steve was really just creating a really solid pathway towards unpacking the messaging that was in his mind, and then packaging it up so that the layperson can understand it. So it's about taking away jargon. It's about taking away a lot of the things that we can be blinded as people and experts in our own field, without realizing that actually that's too much information. And so it's compartmentalizing it and packaging it up in a way that's bite-sized, and that's easily digestible, and that it's accessible more importantly than anything else, and that it's accessible to many. And so in this way, we've been able to step Steve through It's taken about 3 or 4 months. We've started creating a series of videos initially, and I helped him with all his scripts, unpacking all his messaging, and then putting them into a really nifty framework, without him even having to speak to anyone one-on-one, because Steve actually is an introvert himself. And so a large part of that was doing a lot of research, many hours, actually researching his audience online, without having to get on the phone and talk to people. Because obviously I think Steve just needed some time to actually think about how he was going to do everything before he decided to go and do it. And so this kind of framework helped as well. And actually, I've come up with another handy guide for introverted-friendly messaging guide, if anyone wants one, at framework.contenthalo.com. And so this is it's an introvert-friendly guide of actually getting messaging that your market uses, rather than relying solely on your mind or having to, get in front of people and talk to people. I mean, yes, there will come a time when you do, but I think it's really about acknowledging that, us as introverts need more time to bring all the moving pieces together, all the moving parts together, and actually just get really clear about what it is that we're wanting to say before we're ready to say it. And so, so that's another handy guide. But look, I mean, we're now at a point where, it's been 5 months, and Steve has actually put his workshop together, and got several registrations, about nearly 50 registrations to his workshop, which is happening on the 6th of December. So at the I guess it's been a bit of a journey, but by unpacking his messaging and really getting clear on having bite-sized pieces of information in a video format, we've managed to get Steve online. So that's wildly exciting.
Very cool. And you brought up another strength that we have. So yes, it may take us time to prepare and get our thoughts together, get our social media together. But guess what? It's going to be well thought through. So it's going to be solid because we take the time to prepare. Is there any other tips for social media in general when it comes to introverts?
I think, it's more about the preparation around social media. I think the biggest tip that I could probably give anyone, and I suppose, introverts are, let me just think about this, because this one's actually a curly one. I hadn't thought about this one. I think the biggest thing for introverts that I would say is actually getting really clear on your messaging, because as extroverts, and certainly I've had a chance to witness many, things can just roll off your tongue, right? But I think just acknowledging that sometimes it just takes a little bit longer to develop your messaging framework, which can be absolutely crucial in, and make a difference between really nailing your messaging versus not. And I think if people can nail their messaging, that's half the battle won. And that's what the guide that I've developed actually helps people do, is really get clear on their messaging, and by going through it quite systematically, and in a step-by-step way. And so that's probably one tip that I would give most introverts, is really getting clear on their messaging.
Yeah, that's great advice. And again, giving ourselves the time, sometimes giving ourselves the quiet, that's where we can really nail that messaging, as you're talking about. It might take a little longer, but it's going to be good.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've had a great conversation today, Radhika. Is there anything else that you want to talk about that we haven't?
So can I mention the course, or?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
So you mentioned what's on your website already. Your course is coming out. Yeah. Tell us a little more about it.
Yeah. So my course is coming out on the 3rd of January, 2023. My first intake is full of people who are actually wanting to start their journey towards gaining visibility, and really in a safe space, and in a way that actually is quite systematic and walks people through step by step on how to build that visibility online, whilst alongside building your messaging. And so, look, I'm very excited for my very first intake. If anyone's interested in having a look, maybe they can just go on like your show notes or something like that and click on that.
We will definitely put all the information in the show notes, how to find, you already mentioned your website, contenthalo.com, and we'll put how to get to your course. Very excited for you. Again, this is something that many introverts need. So thanks again for being on the podcast. This has been great.
Thank you, David, for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to further connecting with you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com or check out the quietandstrong.com website, which includes blog posts, links to social media, and other items. Send me topics or guests you would like to see on the show. If you're interested in getting to know yourself better, there's now a free Type Finder personality assessment on the Quiet and Strong website. This free assessment will give you a brief report, including the 4-letter Myers-Briggs code. I'll add a link to the show notes. There's so many great things about being an introvert, so we need those to be understood. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs and be strong.